Happy Thanksgiving, Northern Michigan. I'm Chief Meteorologist Tom O'Hare. Well, it has been a crazy year. COVID, the elections, and of course the record high water levels across the Great Lakes the last 8 months. Well, in this special Rising Waters, Rising Concerns report, we'll take a look at the problems and how we handled them.
In the winter, it was January 2013 was the lowest out of 100 years of monthly records that was ever recorded.
If you were around Lakes Michigan Huron in 2013, you remember it. The lakes seem to be disappearing. Records say those 2013 numbers beat the low water level numbers of the 60s. People were worried.
And so I kept saying, I know the system can rebound. I don't know how quick it can rebound.
The rebound started that winter.
And now it rebounded twice as fast as we saw in the 60s.
In 7 short years, we've gone from an all-time low to a new monthly high.
So should be a challenging year still as we try to all together get through this.
This next year isn't going to be easy. But how did we get to these water levels so fast?
Record wetness, wetness, and wetness. And it's the precipitation inputs that have come into the basin. It seems like we're getting more moisture from the Gulf of Mexico area, but we have just had wetness.
It didn't happen all at once, but one rain event last summer helped prove the point.
Michigan did set their like 24-hour all-time record in, it was in Mason County, and it was in July of 2019. It was an incredible amount in 24 hours, like 13 inches or something.
And the recent weather patterns haven't helped our current situation.
You know, it's precipitation versus evaporation leaving the basin minus what kind of goes through the system. And we had really high evaporation in the fall of 2012. We lost an extra foot of water on Lake Michigan Huron, which is an incredible amount.
Here's what we need.
Try to understand the evaporation is basically you want the warmest water and the coldest air coming over it, usually with a little bit of wind. We've had a kind of a period of calm air and in the mid-30s. Even though there's low ice cover right now, there's probably very low evaporation happening because there's not any differential. The water is probably 34, 35 degrees, and here's the air 34, 35 degrees. So what you really want is we want water in the 40s and we want air in the zeros. When we're coming into fall, the water has such heat capacity as it's heated up all summer long, that's when the evaporation happens.
Another thing that's very limited right now is shore ice.
Ice starts along Lake Michigan or Lake Huron and kind of forms out for the first 20, 30 feet. And when that ice forms there, then that allows that to take the brunt of the wave energy. And that really buffers the shoreline.
All these conditions working against us has led to records we don't want.
In January, we broke the record for Lake Michigan and Huron, and as well as Superior. So Superior, we have 100 January records, and now that's the highest. The previous high was in 1986 in January, and now it's a third of an inch higher on Lake Superior. But the more impressive one is the Michigan Huron one because, again, the same 100 years of January records, we have broken it by 3.12 inches. And the combined surface area of Lakes Michigan and Huron, that is 45,000 square miles of the Earth's globe. So 3 inches of water is just quadrillions of gallons.
Is there anything that can be done?
These are great questions. Is there any kind of engineering things to deal with these high lake levels? And really the answer is no. Sometimes this whole issue has been kind of a disaster in slow motion.
Over the next year or so, we'll be doing in-depth reports on the water levels issues around our great state. If you have a story, please email us.
This is kind of one of those situations where our cities, townships, villages, and homeowners have to have a rainy day fund, and rainy day may turn out to be high lake levels fund. So right now we're in a dry flow in northern Michigan, going from west east. Any storm moving on shore is losing its punch rather quickly. What's left over, lots of gusty winds, but very limited moisture, rain showers, snow showers. We have to watch out for developing storms at times, but the flow has been more north than really south at this point. Now, let's go back to 2019 and a couple times before that in previous years. The flow was completely different. Winds and everything generally out of the south, grabbing the moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, pulling it northward and dropping just a tremendous amount of rainfall all across the upper Midwestern states. It was torrential rainfall at times,
and of course, it just really added up. Those areas in dark green, excessive rainfall at times. We're talking the amount of rain is about a foot above the annual average. So you got a foot of rain, maybe 15 inches above the average, and not just in one year, but we're talking several years. The range here, 2013 to 2019. That is not a good combination at all for the Great Lakes. On top of that, 2019, wettest year in more than 100 years for the state. In fact, we set a record for our 24-hour rainfall. Received more than a foot of rain in one spot. Just incredible. On top of that, during those years, we did have periods of just incredibly cold air where the lakes actually did freeze over to some degree. Maybe not every year, but they froze over enough. They trapped in that water because of less evaporation. It couldn't go up in the atmosphere. Limited amounts, but very much less evaporation going on during those really cold periods. So when it came to December 2019, we're already nearly at record levels, setting up things for 2020. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Well, here we are at the beach now. It's 2019. You can tell lots of clouds. That's a problem. The rain's coming down, doesn't want to stop. Let's head out to the beach itself, and you can tell there's the pier. The water levels are coming up, but they're not a problem quite yet. So the rain intensifies, and you're getting a bit of erosion going on right here in the sands. The water is getting a little bit higher, causing more and more issues, but it's still not too bad. And then we get to excessive rainfall. I have to look out for the water. It is really adding up in spots, and that's what's really led to the problems in 2020. It's been a big issue for so many spots. At least there's some good news going on. But let's go back to back earlier this year where a Manistee man really did some extensive work to help protect his property. We'll show you that coming up. Welcome back to our special Rising Waters, Rising Concerns. In this next story, we're heading to Manistee to see what one homeowner is doing to protect his property from falling into Lake Michigan.
I've seen the lake come up and go down.
Ken Orschel has had a connection to Lake Michigan his whole life. As a kid, his parents had a resort just north of Muskegon. He's seen these water levels before.
Obviously, I was alive in the 70s and the 80s when it was basically this level. And my parents even had to move two of their cottages back from the edge of the bluff to save them.
But when he bought this cottage just north of Manistee 11 years ago, he never could have imagined how the property would change, and change fast.
I think when we purchased the property, we had about right around 50 feet of beach when we purchased the property. And then when the lake was at its all-time low, we had 110 feet of beach, which was, 5 and 6 years ago. And the biggest thing that's surprising to me is how quickly this changed from the all-time low to the all-time high.
Let's put it into perspective. His daughter was married out there on what was once a beautiful beach.
They had pictures and stuff out here about 100 feet from the edge. Right now she'd be in water over her head.
It's like that up and down the coast. All this beach was once walkable. This bluff used to connect neighbors.
We could actually walk from here over to that stairway there. So and then this has all been eroded this fall.
What, if anything, can be done? Representative Jack O'Malley recognizes that this is a cyclical issue and is working to create a task force in Lansing. So when this happens again, we are prepared.
My analogy is it's like a leaky roof. Well, your roof is only leaky when it's raining. When the rain stops, you forget about it and you don't fix it, and then it rains again, and darn it, you got a leaky roof again. Why didn't I fix it? So what I am proposing is that we look at what we're doing here, what's working, what isn't working, what should we do for the future, because I contend that flooding in Michigan is a natural disaster emergency like an earthquake is to California and hurricanes are to Florida and the Gulf Coast. So it is not a matter of if we'll have flooding again, it's really a matter of when. So in using my analogy, our roof is leaking right now. Let's figure out how to fix it before we forget.
Meanwhile, Ken has added a seawall.
Mine saved the cottage. That's how it solved me. Had we not had this wall, I think we would have been in the process of moving the cottage back or losing part of the cottage.
He'll have to put in another wall to save his property. Some of his neighbors did that in the 80s, but sand buried them over the years.
Sand was washed in, sand was blown around, and the dune built itself back up over the top of the walls. And you know, we used to walk the beach here, and you would never know anybody had a seawall.
So if and when he has to battle this problem again, he'll at least have a first line of defense due to the 2 seawalls he put in. Because this property is worth fighting for.
Well, along the Great Lakes, you take what comes along, and this is the second time I've been through this. And I'm sure it's not going to be the last time the lake level is going to change.
Next, we take a look at some of our shorelines last April. Last spring, you could see it everywhere. Shorelines disappearing. We took you to the Traverse City area and showed you what was going on.
We're higher than we were last year at this time, and the predictions show an increase in water level the next few months as we get our spring precipitation. Here in Grand Traverse Bay watershed, we're seeing evidence of that everywhere.
One walk around Traverse City and you see it.
We're seeing docks that are submerged. That used to be, actually you were able to put a boat on that dock. Folks might be familiar with the scene at Clinch Park, where we have a lot of infrastructure underwater. The trail system on the Boardman River, that lower Boardman, that system is underwater as well.
In places there was a beach, not anymore. But have we learned from the high levels of 1986? Or even the low levels of 2013. The Watershed Center of Grand Traverse Bay say this is a good opportunity to learn for the next event.
And I think we forget that the Great Lakes are really dynamic and lake levels do change quite a lot. Knowing that they go through these natural cycles of low and high water years. For anybody who's thinking about building along the Great Lakes now, if you're thinking about building 50 feet back, you might consider building 100 feet back. I'm just trying to give some more room for these lakes to naturally cycle.
And when they are low again, let our first line of defense grow. Vegetation. Remember in 2013 when people were raking and mowing their beaches because there was so much beach?
Created this exposed lake bed where things like rushes and sedges, these really important native plants, they started to grow up. And there was kind of a tendency in some situations to mow that or mechanically remove that or add artificial sand on top of that to create more of a beach instead of kind of a wetland landscape. And that vegetation at that land-water interface is so important. When you have vegetation at that land-water interface, those plants have deep root systems and they do a really great job of binding to our sand and soil particles at the water's edge. They do a really good job of deflecting some of that wave energy so they can actually help make that wave break a little bit softer when it comes into the shoreline. So plants play a critical role in ensuring that we have healthy shorelines.
Speaking of shorelines, if you live on one,
we're also asking folks that may have structures that are too close to the water's edge, if that's lawn equipment or a boat or even a shed, if it's possible to move those things back, because once that artificial plastic chair ends up in the Great Lakes, it can break down to smaller pieces of plastic, and that debris is really littering our Great Lakes.
You can see the plastic on the beaches everywhere. In the end, this is a problem that affects everyone in our beautiful area. It's time to learn and remember, we are at the Great Lakes Mercy.
And I think we have to realize that we can't have it all. Unless we go to some sort of floating dock system, we're not going to be able to have a cement walkway that's within 20 feet of the water's edge during a low water year and 20 feet during a high water year. We just have too variable of lake levels. So I think we really need to be careful in our community planning looking forward, because absolutely we're seeing a lot of things crumble into the water now.
Next, we take a look at how important our wetlands are. They filter our water and help keep our lakes clean. In this segment, we take a look at our wetlands.
Think of them as a filter. They transform and they cycle nutrients while they're taking out the toxicants.
Think of these places as the kidneys of the Great Lakes, our coastal wetlands. crucial to the health of the lakes.
The coastal wetlands are essentially this last line of defense with pollutants and toxicants coming off the landscape. So it's the wetland then that filters that material and essentially cleans that water before it reaches the open water of the Great Lakes.
And sustains life above and below the surface.
They're important for floodwater storage. They're obviously their habitat, their nursery habitat for fish. About 90% of all the fish species in the Great Lakes rely on coastal wetlands.
The amount of energy coming out of these wetlands is staggering.
There's only so much energy in the ecosystem as a whole. And at this point, we have a lot of problems we have over 180 exotic species in the ecosystem, and we get a new one on average every 6 months. Now, keep in mind that we've lost 50% of our coastal wetlands, and in some areas like Saginaw Bay, we've lost 95%. So we're losing that energy source, and the energy that is there is going into these invasive species.
And can trigger the harmful algae blooms across our Great Lakes. But are these high water levels good for the wetlands?
The part that helps these coastal wetlands is the natural water level fluctuation. We want to see low water. We want to see that can shift right into high water. And we want to see that fluctuation up and down around the long-term mean. If you think of these systems, they're a transition zone. They're a transition from upland or truly terrestrial habitat to the open water of the Great Lakes, right? So it's this gradient. And what happens is these wetlands will migrate back and forth with water levels, and actually with the more fluctuating water levels, they expand.
That's one of the reasons we get so much inland flooding.
The problem that we have in many cases is that we people like to live on the water, and we like to be on the water. So what happens to that upper portion of the wetland is that it gets filled in, developed, it becomes a resort, it becomes somebody's home, it becomes a road. So now when we get high water, instead of that wetland migrating as it should, now we get flooding because you have a road there. You've bisected the wetland itself, the road's going to flood.
Making the whole system back up, which is partly why you're seeing inland lakes, rivers, and swamps, water levels rising.
The lakes, the streams, and the wetlands are all at the petechiometric surface, or the water table surface. Because of our weather patterns and changes in the jet stream that we're seeing that are very strange, we're getting water brought into the Great Lakes Basin that shouldn't be brought in here and enter our hydrologic cycle. So we're seeing these really high water tables. And of course, the lakes are going to be high, the streams are going to be high, and the wetlands are going to be high because they're at that water table.
Next, we head to the UP and take a look at the problems along the St. Mary's River. Welcome back to our Thanksgiving special, Rising Waters, Rising Concerns. Imagine living along the St. Mary's River, being able to watch the freighters glide by. For some, that was a major issue this year due to the record high water levels.
God's country. Fresh air, blue skies. It's why everybody downstate kills himself to get up here to vacation in the summertime. And for us, it's 12 months.
The St. Mary's River between Sault Ste. Marie and Detour. It's one of the most gorgeous waterways in the world, filled with beauty at every turn. It's also one of the best freighter viewing rivers for boat nerds. You can follow your favorite boat all the way up or down the river. But with the historic water levels we are experiencing, shipping is causing problems due to something called the Bernoulli effect. We were lucky enough to follow the Arthur M. Anderson down the St. Mary's. Watch what happens as the Anderson goes by Rotary Park in the Sault. As the ship approaches, the water gets displaced and needs somewhere to go. Looks like the water is getting sucked out of the river. But as the ship passes, the water comes rushing back, creating waves, which is the problem for property owners up and down the river.
Barb was a really bad spot because it's very low, it floods so bad. When those freighters go through here, it just sucks the water right out and it'll pitch it back up maybe 50 feet onto somebody's lawn.
Because the Anderson is smaller than the 1,000-footers, this footage is not as dramatic, but this happens all up and down the river. Welcome to Bob's Island by Detour. Most of this was yard a couple years ago.
The bigger boats, the ore carriers, predominantly are the ones that throw the big wakes up there.
Again, it's not just the freighters, it's the water levels. And in Detour, the dreaded east wind.
We get a great wind coming right from Drummond Island towards us, and it washes right up on here. As I mentioned earlier, 5 years ago it was 100 yards out. Flatstone, we used to launch fireworks out there. But now, coupled with a ship going by, it'll wash right up onto the deck. It'll wash right up here and splash on the window.
The waves into his yard have even created a duck pond.
It's kind of eye-opening. There's mornings I wake up and I wonder if I'm going to have a houseboat or something of that nature. I haven't tried fishing off the deck yet, but it's getting close. I can toss a rock from the couch into the water now.
Down the shoreline, about a quarter mile, Kathy Coring is having the same problems. East winds are not her friend.
We call it the beast from the east because it starts from way over there. It's a huge fetch. And by the time we get it, it just destroys us. Just destroys us. It was bad enough when we had low water. Now with high water, it just wipes us out every time.
A couple of weeks ago, a seiche blew in and covered parts of her property.
And after a storm, we can find rocks that big, that maybe 40-pounders that you can barely lift. And they have been thrown back from the shoreline at least 25, 30 feet. That's a power in those waves. It's not just us, it's everybody, up and down, all of the Great Lakes. Everybody's suffering right now.
They are about to lose their boathouse.
This is all the land we have left after the storm. We used to have land out to that jet ski lift, which I would mow.
So the question is it worth it to live here?
There's not a lot I can do about it. You know, this is the price of living in heaven. It is God's country, and things come with it.
We moved out here. I said to him, that's the last place I'm going. Next one, I go out into Pine Box because I am not leaving this place. I'm not leaving this river. I love it. Absolutely love it.
Next, we head to Cedarville, where we find out what a couple of dock building businesses are doing to fight the high water levels. Imagine living on a beautiful lake and not being able to enjoy it because your dock is underwater. Well, there's a couple of Cedarville companies that have an answer.
We brought the boathouse up, I don't know, 2.5 feet.
The phone's ringing nonstop, and we're just trying to keep up.
You can see the problem all over the Les Chenaux Island chain in Mackinac County. Docks underwater, boathouses destroyed, property eroding away. Let's talk about high water. It's so high, this fairly new dock, just put in a couple years ago, got a boat floating on top of it already. Yeah, a couple inches deep here. So one owner's solution, well, the old dock. You put on top of the new dock until that water level finally goes down, at least in a couple years.
So many people are dependent on their docks, the island residents, the local residents, and then the shorelines are taking a beating like everywhere.
Jason Dunn and Jonas Carpenter from Braeswept Docks in Cedarville have been building crib docks in the area for years. These water levels have them scrambling all over the 36 islands in the Les Chenaux, building and fixing docks. They built this boathouse 2 years ago. The owner originally wanted it 18 inches lower. They talked him out of that.
He's very thankful he did, because he'd be about 4 inches underwater right now.
For the people underwater, they build up.
Here's another catwalk to answer your questions from earlier. What do people do when the docks are still good? You just build a catwalk, and when the cribs are, in still good shape, it's a temporary fix.
A different dock, but a different solution to the same problem.
Under the deck here, we've got what we call closed cell polystyrene. It's sandwiched together by timber and steel, and that foam acts as the flotation material.
Floating docks. Cody Carmichael owns Flotation Docking Systems in Cedarville. They build floating dock systems for city marinas and state municipal harbors all over the Great Lakes.
They're anchored in place with steel pipes that go down. If it's too deep, we can do tension chains and concrete deadman anchors, but it's a simple concept, but I'd say we've kind of mastered it.
It's a pretty simple concept, whatever the water level is.
Whether we're where we are right now or 5 feet lower, this dock's always going to be the exact same height off the water. It's just the angle of this gangway is going to be different.
Even though these rising water levels do make living on the water more expensive, in the end, both FDS and Breeze Swept are working to do the same thing, keeping your boat safe, keeping your feet dry, and keeping those memories alive for a lifetime.
The dock was more than just a place to tie a boat up. It was a place to entertain people, family, guests, have dinner parties. So our docks turned into more of just a place to tie a boat up. They became a gathering place for people.
Next, we head to Bay Mills, where the water levels were causing an issue with their cemetery. A bloody battle was once fought near the Point Iroquois Lighthouse. An Iroquois tribe from the New York area was preparing for battle to take over the local fur trade. But the local Ojibwe got wind of this and went to war. That was back in 1662. Now, centuries later, some are worried about the historic lands.
There's what we call Mission Hill up the road. It's very high and you can see, everywhere. So they saw smoke coming, so they went to check it out. Sure enough, they were preparing for battle. They were doing their 4-day feasting and dancing. And so we waited for the 4th day after they were tired and then went in and annihilated them.
Hundreds died. The invading force got strung up on this beach.
It was a warning to everyone, don't come this way or the same thing will happen to you. Our people who died in that battle are buried here in a mass grave here. We did do ground penetrating radar in 1995, and there is a mass grave here.
They did another GPR search here last fall.
There's a lot. They picked up a lot more when they went outside the fence. There was, I believe, over 1,800.
They are buried under these spirit houses.
We believe it's a 4-day journey to the happy hunting grounds or to the other side. We always face them east because that's where the direction we came from and our legends tell us. And we put a hole on this side, and then things are put in there that they're going to need on their journey. This is from the water raising big waves.
Down the coast in 2017, they lost 10 to 15 feet of beach. That's when Paula got worried.
The waters are rising, and I understand everybody's having this problem. And sure enough, it is starting to wash out from the waves, the high water level that's happening here. So I have a big concern. In the fall, when the gale force wind, these waves are going to hit that bank.
She applied for and received a $455,000 grant from the Army Corps of Engineers to come up with a solution so the sacred ground doesn't get washed into the St. Mary's River.
I'm waiting for the results of that to come up with solutions how to stop these banks from eroding to protect our burial site.
Because their history means everything to them.
These are my relatives. We were always taught to protect our burial grounds. You respect your elders. We were taught to respect our elders. They're our elders.
Coming up next, we take a look at some of the destruction across northern Michigan. Welcome back to Rising Waters, Rising Concerns, where we're taking a look back at the destruction across the Great Lakes over the last 8 months.
2020, this was going to be a big issue on the lake levels and the impacts no matter what. And again, other things came along and still a big issue. So in Lake Michigan and Huron, we broke the 101-year-old records every month of the year from January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. And I think we may well break it in September.
Okay, this is Iron Ore Bay. The road is washed out.
While we are not going to break September's record, high water is one of the reasons for destruction all over the state. Check out the south end of Beaver Island at Iron Ore Bay. There used to be a road here. A south wind wiped a portion out of it a couple weeks ago.
I've been trying to talk to people. It's like a skyscraper where it's 100 stories tall. 8 years ago, everybody was living on the 20th floor. We were doing just fine. Finally, we reached halfway up the 50th floor. But this year, we've been at the 98th, 99th, 100th, but we've been living at the 100th. Now we've dropped down to the 95th.
And now it's fall. known for its brutal storms.
Any of the winds can do tremendous damage, and that's the old song, the gales of November. November is our windiest month on average, so even if they drop another 6 inches by November, it's still, we're way up there, and that lots of things are at risk. Lots of lighthouses, lots of places that are just near and dear to our hearts.
And when we try to save the things we love, sometimes our neighbors don't fare so well.
When any hardening structure goes in, it has an impact kind of up lake and down lake, and your neighbors can definitely be impacted with advanced erosion. So, and in general, if possible, the best scenario is just to try and ride it out without hardening.
Because the lakes will eventually go back down.
Yeah, the beaches are going to be different. The slumping that's coming off is those waves just hammer away at the toe of the area, and that gravity does its thing. So it's reshaping the shoreline. What do we learn from a high water period? I think we have to learn to respect the nature shoreline a little bit more. We want to access it. We want to get universal access to the places and allow people to come enjoy that. But yet we got to recognize that that may only be a temporary thing.
And next, we'll take a look at one of the most photographed lighthouses in the state and what they're doing to protect it. Welcome back to Rising Waters, Rising Concerns. We're heading over to the Point Betsy Lighthouse to show you what they're doing to protect it for years to come.
It's a wonderful historical site. It's a beautiful romantic site.
It's one of Michigan's most beloved lighthouses, standing defiant against Lake Michigan since 1858.
So if you look at a map, Lake Michigan's pretty much north-south from here down to Chicago. And from here to the Straits of Mackinac, it really turns and goes more diagonal. And we're right at that pivot. So this was a critical spot that ships pivoted around historically.
Because of that, the point gets pounded by the lake.
Yeah, you definitely see a lot of, waves that come in from every direction. Whether it's northern winds, southern winds, eastern winds, western winds, we kind of get hit just because we do jut out like that. And so we kind of have a concrete apron that sweeps around to kind of protect the lighthouse, but it kind of takes the waves from every angle, and no matter kind of what system is in place, there's always going to be some shore erosion because of that.
The apron is starting to show its age.
Our current shoreline protection system dates back about 75 years, and it has not been a secret to us that we've needed to do some repairs to it. It's been very sturdy and lasted longer than we expected, but the erosion is relentless and the damage is ongoing, and the high water levels only tend to make that urgency that much worse, that much more obvious, and kind of force our hand. We've got to attack this problem sooner rather than later.
And it's not cheap.
We're still in the fundraising part because we are, working with these regulatory boards. So we have a historical structures report that is out to the State Historic Preservation Office and the Army Corps of Engineers. And then the next phase after that will be an engineering study that will look at the concrete details of what the plan is going to be that we're going to do.
Exactly how much our target is going to be depends on these engineering studies, but it will be multiple millions. And we need a lot of help, so please give generously.
And help keep the most photographed lighthouse in Michigan standing tall and proud.
I don't think we're literally going to fall in the water today or tomorrow, but we will eventually, and let's do it a year early rather than a day late.
Well, we're back here at the beach, northern Michigan, and of course the water is still quite high. We're in fall of 2020, but the good news, the rain has let up a lot. That's some really good news. And the water levels, well, give it time, they are going down. We know they are dropping. That's some great news, in fact. But here is a part of the issue. They're going down for now because there are seasonal changes that happens. It's every year, it's what happens. They go up, they go back down. And of course, they'll go back up again next year. But more importantly, what is going to happen next year? Let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's talk about those water levels in northern Michigan. Back in 2013, we were at record lows. There were concerns that we would not go up for years to come, but we did. We had very cold water temperatures, freezing lakes, lots of rainfall in the coming years, and then we got to 2019, all the rain. Here's 2020. And that's what we did this year right here. The old records are right there. We broke each record right through August. finally getting back below the records in September. That was better news because we did not need to see any more records this year alone. And the forecast keeps things going down. Really good news right here. At this point, about 6 inches below the new records we set this year alone. So we're on the way down. There might be a rise up, but we have to wait and see what happens over the winter months. So the good news, the levels, they are dropping. It's a seasonal drop, a little more on top of that. It's a good steady rate going down. We are already lower than last year at the same time, even better to see that. Now, no question, we will have a rise again next year. The melting snow that goes back into the big lakes. But at this point, the records are not likely for later on next year. Thanks for watching Rising Waters, Rising Concerns. For Corey Ekins and myself, have a happy Thanksgiving and have a great night. We leave you with some beautiful views from high above in northern Michigan.